I'm 16, a female, and I'm in year 11. I've just started a Saturday job at a shop in a large chain of stores. I work from Saturday at 9 till 5:30. Literally the second week I worked there, this guy came in. He was trying to talk to me in a kind of flirtatious manner. If I had to guess, he was probably in his mid-20s, which is a big deal considering I'm only 16. I do look slightly older though, so maybe he had thought I was 18. I was honestly bored as shit, so I didn't think anything of it. He was just someone to chat to as I was ringing up his shopping. Later that day he came back into the store. He was apparently on his lunch break and he'd said something like, "Thought I'd come back and see you again," which I thought was weird and teetering on creepy. He then tried to give me his number. I told him not to worry about it as he was frantically trying to find a pen. He even went outside the shop to ask every passerby for one. He got one eventually, came back inside and gave me his number. I had a long line of customers at that point and I was alone on the tills, so I took it in the hopes he'd just go away. He asked me for my name, but I didn't want to tell him because at this point I was quite creeped out. I told him it didn't matter, but then he got back in line for my till, bought something and asked for the receipt. The receipts all have my fucking name on the bottom, don't they? He finally leaves, saying something about how I'm beautiful and we need to meet up sometime. No we don't. I was working again the next week and he was back, in wanting to know why I hadn't texted. He was hovering around the tills and basically wouldn't go away. I'd already told my colleagues and manager about him, so I shot my colleague, who was on the till with me, a look. But this guy hadn't done anything, so there wasn't really anything we could do. At this point, I've not made any attempt at making small talk with him, as he's really creeping me out. I just acted like he wasn't there and chatted with my colleague. I made sure to specifically bring up school and GCSEs to my colleague while he was there, just in case he didn't realise that I was 16. He was probably hovering around for about 5 minutes or so, and was not going away anytime soon. This was probably about 10 minutes after the shop had opened, so we didn't have many customers. He kept saying I should have texted, so I bit the bullet and just told him straight. "I should have told you last week, but I didn't want to embarrass you in front of a line of people. I'm really not interested. Sorry." So then he was like, "Oh, okay, we can still be friends, right?" Obviously I have to be professional because I'm at work, so I didn't answer that one. Then he was trying to tell me I have a gorgeous smile, but I wasn't smiling at this point and he was still being really creepy. In the end I found an excuse to go out into the warehouse, when in reality I was going to get my manager to come and tell him to leave. Apparently as soon as I'd left to go and get the manager, he bought a packet of sweets and left rather quickly. I guess he knew what I was doing. Later that day I go on my lunch break. I have the same lunch break routine every week, and this guy knew what time my lunch break was from the first time he'd come into the shop. He'd said something like, "Not long till lunch now, is it?" "Oh, not really. I always have lunch at 12:30. As at that point I hadn't realised he was a massive creep. So obviously now my colleagues and manager know what he looks like. My colleague was there when he was hovering around and had given a description to the manager. They also went through the cameras to get a better idea of what he looked like. It was 12:30 and I went to go on my lunch break. My manager came to me and said, "Don't be alarmed, but I'm pretty sure he's hanging around the entrance to the shop, waiting for you to come out. He also knows I usually go out for lunch." Again, another thing I told him the first time. He was asking a shit ton of questions and I didn't think anything of it. We were just making small talk in my mind. I snuck out to the back entrance at my manager's request and didn't go to the place I usually go, just in case he knew where that was as well. I went somewhere else instead. Honestly, I was so creeped out, I didn't want to go out for lunch at all. But I had to because I didn't bring any food and I'm not doing another nearly 5 hours of work on an empty stomach. I got a phone call from my manager saying to not come back through the front entrance, as he's still there, and apparently while I was on my break, he came into the store and was asking where the young lady who served him earlier was. Apparently he was trying to say I'd made a mistake on the register and he needed to know when I'd be back so he could ask me about it. Obviously at this point the manager says, "Look, you're harassing one of my staff members. Leave her alone and don't come back." Then apparently he was still waiting outside the store when I was due to come back from my break. I had to go round the back again. Since then he's appeared another Saturday, and I only work Saturday. He knows that. Apparently no one sees a peep out of him throughout the week, so he literally only comes in to creep on me. Yesterday he was waiting around the road that we use for the back entrance, so he's obviously figured out where that is too. It was around 10 to 9 and I started at 9. One of my colleagues saw him and phoned me to let me know, and while he was hovering there I snuck in through the front entrance. He seems to come in, hover around the tills, try to talk to me, then basically runs when someone goes to get management. Some weirdo has also been following me on Instagram. A new account with 0 followers and no profile picture. Every time I block them, a new one starts following me. I reckon it's him. He knew my name from the receipt, and we have a staff rota up in the store which has our surnames on it. It wouldn't have been too hard for him to find. My Instagram is also firstname.surname, so it's pretty straightforward. Before I made my account private and blocked all of those accounts, I got a message from one saying, "I just wanted to let you know you're beautiful," with a heart and a cum emoji. My manager has contacted the police, but as you can imagine, it's not high on their priority list. He hasn't threatened me or done anything. I now have to get my mum to pick me up and take me to work. Plus I take packed lunch and don't go out on my break anymore. Hopefully he'll get the hint soon, or the police will have to sort it out, but they may take a while. So yeah, Saturday Job Perv, let's not meet again, please. I'm actually getting pretty scared about going into work. Edit. Thanks for all of the responses. I'm sorry to those of you who have had stuff like this progress further. I honestly cannot imagine how horrible that must be. My manager did inform the police, and they basically said they can't do anything at the moment because there's not enough evidence. And he hasn't threatened me. I met one of my best friends in middle school. Her name is Josie, and we've been close friends for nearly 20 years. This story happened early on in our friendship, and it was an experience that would bond us for life. We were around 12 or 13 at the time, and it was a Friday. Whilst at school, she invited me to spend the weekend with her at her house. Josie lived outside of the city, about 30 minutes from our school. Her home was nestled in a heavily wooded area and was one of the few houses in that area. They all sat on huge, tree-covered lots, but there were only 2 or 3 families that could truly be considered to live in the same neighbourhood. We were a bit foolhardy and adventurous, as people tend to be at that age. We liked to stamp around the woods, bare-ankled, knowing full well that venomous snakes lived in the area, and we would get far too close to beehives in order to be able to watch the bees' activities. Our sense of youthful invulnerability hadn't yet left us. Saturday morning, shortly after I'd arrived at her house, we decided to go sit by the pond for a while and eat some breakfast. We ate toast and jam and gossiped about subjects I don't recall, but which lightly included a lot of chatter from me about my crushes, while Josie, a later bloomer than I, nodded along, probably bored as hell, but feeling indulgent. She remains a truly loyal friend with a great listening ear to this day, and my hormones have since calmed down. When we grew restless, we decided to walk around and see what there was to see. There wasn't much. It was autumn, but most of the pretty foliage was already crisping up and turning brown, if not in the ground already. We kicked around the leaves and probably gossiped some more while looking for interesting flora or fauna, but came up short in our hunt. In fact, I was getting tired. I remember thinking later that if I'd asked to go back to the house to grab a shower like I'd wanted, we could have avoided this whole thing. But Josie still looked like she was enjoying the walk, so I stayed quiet. Eventually we did spot something interesting. Another person on the path ahead. We stopped for a moment and watched him warily. Josie and I had met one of the other families in the area, a fairly clean-cut married couple with 2 young children. We didn't know the other family, but most of the people who were drawn to the relatively peaceful, inexpensive area were either young families or senior citizens. This guy was almost definitely not one of them. He was in his early 20s, tall and wiry, with incredibly bad posture. Hardly the thing most 13-year-olds would notice, so it must have really been bad. He wore a tight black turtleneck, a beanie, and wide black cargo pants, and I realised that description may sound more hipster before his time than serial killer in the making. but the effect was genuinely unsettling. His hair was long and pulled back really messily. He was crouched down at the side of the path, maybe tying his shoe or looking for something he'd dropped, maybe leaning over something on the ground. I don't like to think about it. At first, he didn't notice us, but when he did, he straightened up in a snap, and he just stared at us. Being, as I said, an early bloomer, I was sadly already used to being stared at by men in a certain way, but this didn't feel like that. Josie's hand brushed mine, trembling, and Josie was always my most fearless friend. If she was shaken, there was good reason to be. For a moment we just stood there on opposite ends of this stretch of path, watching each other warily. Eventually Josie waved. The man didn't wave back. His face was completely expressionless. Again, the description reads a lot less frightening than it was to see. It was like looking into the face of a shark. "Let's go back," Josie muttered to me. We weren't far from our house. It didn't occur to me at the time in my elevated state of panic, but it was incredibly bizarre that this man was on her family's land. I was all too happy to comply. We turned our backs and hoped that that would be the end of it. And mostly it was. We didn't have any face-to-face experiences with him after that. But two notable, curious things did occur. The first was that the walk back felt far, far too long. We hurried the best we could, but couldn't shake the feeling that he was following us, just out of sight. Shortly after the point where the path diverged between one that led to Josie's house and one that led closer to the main road, we heard the distinct sound of crunching leaves under heavy footsteps. We looked through the trees toward the other path and saw a tall figure in black prowling along, as if to make sure we really were going home and not heading back to see what he had been up to. The second was that the week after, Josie came to school visibly shaken for the second time. She told me that the family who lived closest to her house, incidentally, the border between Josie's property and theirs was not too far from where we had seen the man, found their dog's body mutilated in a rusty shed on the edge of their property, along with another dog, uncollared, probably a stray, and some squirrels and other small wildlife. I won't share the details of what Josie informed me they found, but they gave me nightmares that night. I don't know if the man we saw was the man who committed such heinous acts. My love for the horror genre and the feeling deep in my gut both tell me he was, and we all know the fear response happens for a reason. But whether he was or wasn't, creepy forest guy who enjoyed following young teenage girls around at best, let's not meet. So I was living with my grandparents at the time, and they lived in a far-out residential area of town at the end of a road that leads into farming land. They were in a townhouse complex, and fortunately right at the front, which meant it was a 1-minute walk out to the complex to the bus stop, right across the street. My stop was the very last stop on the route. One day I was waiting at the bus stop that's right near the trendy downtown area of my city, but a little out of the way. It's a relatively small city and doesn't have the greatest bus system, and there were only 2 buses that stopped at this particular stop, the one to my place and the one into the next town over. This was its last stop before hitting the freeway. The stop is also right next to the restaurant where my then fiancé, now husband, worked as a manager. I was sitting there texting my fiancé as he was just starting to close up. It was around 4 p.m, but it was a lunch joint, and a kinda sketchy, dirty-looking guy comes up and sits down on the bench. There was plenty of room, so it was no big deal. After a moment, he started to make conversation with me. This was around 2 years ago, so I don't remember exactly what he was saying, but I asked if he was taking the bus into the nearby city, and he said yes, as he lived there. The whole time he was there, he was almost comically manspreading, with one leg up on the bench, proudly displaying his crotch. I ignored this and politely responded to him when necessary, while texting my fiancé. The bus arrives, and creepy guy gets on. This is not the bus to nearby town. I'm a little weirded out at this point and mention it to my fiancé in my texts. I was sitting at the back of the bus and he was sitting at the very front, but turned all the way around so he was facing me, staring at me. Oh hell no. The bus goes through some residential areas and then makes a brief stop at a little strip mall, and then it's just houses from there until the end. I'm texting my fiancé and getting more and more creeped out, as he does nothing but look at me when I'm not watching. We hit the strip mall and he doesn't get off. Now I'm legitimately freaked out. There's nowhere else for him to go. I text my fiancé and he's coming to meet me at my bus stop. Don't get off anywhere else and don't interact. My husband is now a security guard and going into policing, so he's taking the situation pretty seriously. I somewhat loudly respond by saying, "Okay, yeah, I'll see you there, babe." Creepy guy immediately turns around and faces front. Holy crap. I spend the next 5 minutes anxiously thinking of what I'd do if he isn't there when I get to my stop. I can't just go into my house if he gets off the bus. He'll know where I live. We come around the corner to the very last stop, and this guy still hasn't gotten off. He's very intentionally facing as far away from me as possible now. I get off the bus just as my fiancé pulls up, and this guy does not. This is the last stop, and the bus is now going on the reverse route. This guy was following me. My fiancé ended up walking me to my door, checking the house and making me lock everything up until my grandparents got home. I was pretty shaken, to be honest. He went back to work to finish closing up, but came back again later. All in all, I'm lucky to have a husband who took me so seriously, and I'm not sure what would have happened had I not gotten that call from him to say that he was coming. This story is a little strange, but it is true. This happened when I was about 18 or 19. I was driving home one night during a blizzard when I saw some guy walking in the snow. For some reason I thought I'd recognized him as a kid who used to ride my bus. We'll call the kid Thomas. To give you some background, Thomas was always shy and quiet. Nobody ever seemed to talk to him, but there were times I remembered kids messing with him. They'd throw paper wads trying to hit him and make fun of the way he looked. I never saw him get angry or react in any way. He just seemed like he wasn't there at all. I started sitting by Thomas and talking to him. I could tell he had low self-esteem and wasn't well cared for. He didn't have much to say, but just sitting beside him kept people from messing with him. I'd share food with him and try to make sure he was okay. Even though he seemed pretty distrustful of me, I considered Thomas to be like a brother. But he disappeared in the 6th grade. So back to the story. Naturally, I pulled up beside the guy and asked if he wanted a ride. The guy shot me a glance and quickly averted his gaze back towards the ground. He wasn't who I thought he was. He said no, which I thought was strange because it was like 12 degrees and the wind had a miserable chill. I asked if he was sure and he confirmed, so I drove on. I stopped at a gas station a few miles down the road. As I pumped gas at the slowest pump in the world, somebody approached me. "Hey, can me and my friend have a ride?" I looked up and to my surprise, it was Thomas. The once scared-looking kid now looked like he'd been run over by life. His expression was hard, his clothes were inadequate for the weather, and his skin and eyes were red, but he seemed unaffected by the cold. It was definitely Thomas, but I could tell he didn't recognize me. I told him I'd be happy to give him a ride. He called some dude from behind the gas station, and it was the guy to whom I'd previously offered a ride. I have no idea how he made it to the gas station before me. Granted, I drive like a grandmother, and the gas pumped slowly, but still, I felt like I was in the Twilight Zone. I got in the car and asked where they were headed. They just told me to drive, and they'd tell me where to turn. Red flag, I know. After I started driving, I noticed they smelled of smoke. Not like cigarettes or marijuana smoke either. It was some chemically smell, and I realized their eyes weren't red from the cold. I decided to feel out their position. I said something like, "You two must have been freezing out there. I'm sorry that my heat doesn't work, but at least you don't have to deal with the wind." They didn't really respond. I realized they were taking me further from town and deeper into wooded regions. I ended up on a back road, the gravel kind, which was full of potholes and ice mud puddles. I was nervous my car was going to get stuck and had a feeling that something bad was planned. I zeroed in on Thomas. "Your name's Thomas, isn't it?" I saw the two exchange glances in the mirror. "You probably don't remember me, but we used to ride the bus together." Thomas's eyebrows furrowed and he paused. "Yeah, I think maybe we did." He paused like he was thinking. I told him that I enjoyed talking with him and that I missed him when he left. I said I thought about him often. He said he missed me too, and he was sorry, but he had to leave. I said something like, "I'm sorry you felt like you had to leave. I don't know what you were going through, but I wish I could have helped you. You always seem so alone." Man, I was alone. He kind of laughed, but not in a funny way. It was almost like he was in disbelief, and I feel like he had sobered somewhat. "But you were always so nice to me. It was my pleasure. You were a sweet person and a good friend. I'm sorry that not everybody saw that." "You were a good friend," he said. He told me to stop the car and firmly told me to wait there. The two got out and stood by my car. I know the smart thing would have been to drive off, but something told me I was supposed to stay. I texted my boyfriend and told him that I may not make it home, told him about where I was and that I loved him. The two proceeded to fight about something outside of my car for a while. Thomas got back in the car without his friend and told me to drive him back to the gas station. As I drove him back, he proceeded to tell me what was up. He told me he'd run away to Detroit when he was in the 6th grade and lived with some distant family. He got involved with a gang and was dealing drugs. He'd just come back home the day before with 2 friends and was selling, I think, crack. One of his friends sold a bad batch or something and had been picked up by the popo. The other 2 were on the run, which is when they ran into me. I didn't bother asking what they'd originally planned when they'd asked for a ride. We sat in the car for a while, discussing his past and what he'd gone through. He'd agreed that he wanted to get clean and turn his life around. When I dropped him off, he said, "Thank you for everything. I really have missed you." And that was that. This happened about 2 to 3 years ago. Apparently I attract a lot of old creeps, but really it all started much earlier than I thought. My grandma often called this hairdresser who would drive over and cut her hair, and mine sometimes when I would visit. He's in his 60s and he'd apparently worked for many years for L'Oreal and had a lot of connections there. The first time he cut my hair I was 15. The second time I was 17. Both times he seemed extremely sweet, constantly complimenting me about my appearance, telling me that I would make a perfect hair model, and was just showering me in praise. I now know that that's what's called grooming. Ironic really, coming from a hairdresser. My grandma scheduled for him to come over in the morning, and stupid me didn't set an alarm. So I woke up to the sound of knocking on the bedroom door, and the hairdresser saying, "Aurora, sweetie, are you awake? I'm sorry to wake you like this, but I have to be somewhere else soon. Could you please hurry? Don't worry, I promise I will take good care of your hair, regardless." I jumped out of bed. I had been sleeping naked that night because it was so hot in that room for some reason. So I quickly put on a backless dress that was left on a chair and opened the door, ashamed that I had only just woken up. The hairdresser beams as he sees me, but he looks like he's in a huge hurry. I respected that and just did as he'd said. I washed my hair in the sink, put a towel around my shoulders and sat on the chair that he had placed in the middle of the common area between 3 bedrooms on the 2nd floor of my grandma's house. He initiates some small talk and asks me how old I am now. I answer that I'm 19 now. Then he starts, "Ooh, so you're a woman now. You know you are the most gorgeous woman I have ever seen. All my clients are done with hearing me talk about you. They all know you as my favourite girl. But that's because I can't stop thinking about you, you know? You're always on my mind. Your hair, your face, your kindness. I'm always eagerly waiting for the day when I can finally see you again." And then he drops it. "I'm in love with you." Back then I thought this was just how he was. He had been that way those other 2 times I met him, and I saw nothing wrong with it. I thought that was probably just part of his personality. Haha, he's just being extra, I thought. No. Oh, was I wrong? He continued to tell me that he was in love with me, then said I was the love of his life. He then offered to take me with him in his van for a week and we'd go on L'Oreal panels together, and that I just had to say the word and he would take me with him right there, right now. I slowly started panicking. For every 5 I love yous, I'd give a polite and joking, haha, yeah, I love you too, sir. And he'd respond with, really? You mean it, right? Because I mean it. I'm serious. I'm head over heels for you. I understand at this point that this is definitely weird. I'm running the logistics in my head. How can I escape? He's a little chubby and I can maybe push him and bolt down the stairs. I left my phone in my bedroom and there's no time to grab it before I run. What if he chases me? Can I scream for help if he tries anything? No one can hear me if I scream. The only person here is my grandma, and she's semi-deaf and in the garden right now. This is a rural area. The neighbours are all elderly and it's a long way to get to their house. I feel trapped. Suddenly he asks me to stand up. Confused, I oblige. He ditches the chair and comes to stand behind me, cutting some of my hair in the back for a second. He takes off the towel wrapped around my shoulders and there's a pause. Then, I feel his shaking hand making full contact with my shoulder blade and slowly caressing me all the way to the small of my back, right above where my dress covers the rest. And with that, a warm, shaky breath down my neck. I froze. Alarm bells go off in my head. Nope, nope, nope. This is not innocent. This is not normal. This is not him just being extra. I have to get out of here. But I'm frozen in place. I'm scared. All I could think was, this can't be real. This can't be happening. Please tell me this isn't real. He removes his hand and says, "You're so beautiful," as he continues to cut. Then I remembered something my grandma had told me about this man. His wife of 40+ years left him not long ago, but he found someone else with whom he seemed very happy and with whom he went on a trip to Greece. So I decided to bring it up to put some distance between us. "Oh, by the way, sir, I heard about your new partner. You went on a trip together, right? Congratulations." "A new partner? I never had a new partner. I never had a new partner. I'm as single as can be." "Oh? I'm sorry, it must have been someone else then." He was lying. Eventually he finishes cutting my hair and tells me that he's running late, so he needs to leave immediately. I lead him down the stairs and he asks me again about the offer of going with him on a 1-week and hopefully more trip in his van to tour L'Oreal panels. I politely refuse. He asks me out for coffee. I politely refuse again. He asks me if I often spend time in this area. I say no. He looks extremely frustrated but finally says his goodbyes and leaves. When my grandma finally comes back from gardening, I ask her, still trying to recover from the shock, "Hey Grandma, I asked this hairdresser about the partner you told me he was so in love with. He said he's always been single since his wife left him. Did you maybe mistake him for someone else?" "What? He said that?" "Oh no, absolutely not. Believe me, I'd never make that kind of mistake." Indeed, I believed her. I later explained everything to my parents and they told my grandma. She was outraged and never called him again. She now has a new favourite hairdresser, and here's what I have to say to the previous one who wanted us to meet again so badly. "Hey, creepy L'Oreal hairdresser. No, let's not meet again." I'm 20 years old and a front desk agent at a mid-range hotel in a small East Coast city. I'm a full-time student at the university and live alone in a 1-bedroom apartment in a neighbourhood made up of mostly college students. At the hotel, I've had to deal with a fair amount of unpleasant and creepy people, since a young woman in a customer service job seems like an easy target. I was used to old ladies yelling at me or inappropriately aged men making remarks on my appearance like, "You have the most adorable smile," "You're a heartbreaker," and I've usually been able to deflect. When I work on weekdays, I'm always on the 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. shift, where we handle check-ins. It was a slow night, where we only had 28 check-ins to deal with, and by 8 p.m. my co-worker Mindy and I had done all our tasks and were leaning over the front desk chatting and watching the news, which blared from the TVs in the lobby's breakfast area. We only had a handful of check-ins left, so we had kicked back with our deck of cards and a Chinese takeout all over the desk. Later on, a younger man checked in, and I remember thinking he was cute-ish, but definitely looked Republican. He had neat blonde hair, a boyish smile, and a weak chin, and he was wearing khakis and a quarter-zip fleece. We had a pretty regular interaction, save for him making a lot of eye contact and smiling. Then he went to his room. About a half an hour later, he came back down and asks us where he can get alcohol. We told him the convenience store across the street had beer and wine, and he and I joked a little about how it was closing soon, so he had better run there. When he came back, he slid a 40-ounce across the desk towards me. With my customer service smile of vague cluelessness, I said, "What's this?" "It's for you." He leaned against the desk. Front desk agents have to stand up, so the top tier of the desk was about chest height, and when he leaned over, it was right in my face. "Oh, I can't drink it right now, but thank you. I think you should be the one to enjoy that." He was insistent, so I agreed I would take it to drink after work, and I went into the office and put it with Mindy's stuff. She'd appreciate the free alcohol, but I didn't feel good about drinking a 40 from some overly friendly guy. He hung around the desk for a while. Mindy is the type of person who can keep someone talking for hours, even if they don't want to, because her brain never runs out of content, and she treats everyone like she's known them for years. This meant that this guy, who I'll call Mr. Hanson, wasn't leaving anytime soon. They were talking about politics, and I heard him throw around some vaguely conservative rhetoric, but I pretended to be engrossed in my homework. He kept glancing over at me and trying to smile, but it was getting late. My feet hurt, and all I wanted to do was to be at home in my underwear rolling a spliff with my cats all around me, instead of allowing some 35-year-old to think he can flirt with me. At one point, Mindy had to make a phone call, so he slid down the desk towards me. I looked up with my customer service smile back on. "So, go to a small liberal arts college, do you?" My uniform shirt was short-sleeved, so you could see a couple of tattoos on my arm, and I have some nose piercing, so I assumed that and the music theory homework I was working on informed his guess. "No, haha. I go to the University of this city." The city's main attraction, besides its hippies and breweries, was my college, a pretty good state school, so it was somewhat surprising he didn't assume I went there instead. He was sizing me up, and I prayed that Mindy would be done with her phone calls soon, but it was her long-distance boyfriend, and she had wandered into the back office to talk to him. He started talking about his experiences at his southern university, and how he was a veteran, but had gotten injured, so he lived off of a pension or something, and didn't work, and was just touring New England right now. The conversation somehow turned to his love life, but I'm pretty sure I was so spaced out by that point, thinking about how I was going to eat at least one entire frozen pizza when I got home, that I didn't pay attention to what he was saying until it was clear he had asked me a question. "Would you do that?" he asked. Would I do what? Get freaked out because I don't work? A lot of the chicks I date think that's weird. I remember exactly what he'd said because I thought it was weird he called girls chicks and how he spat it out. I laughed nervously and said, "I don't know, I don't think so." The hotel was on the smaller side, and I was very aware of the fact that Mindy and I were the only employees in the building right then. He began to ask me probing questions about my love life along the lines of, "Are you single?" "No?" "Well, why do you like him?" "Would you like him if he moved away?" "Do you think you'll be with him a long time?" The last question he asked freaked me out, and I wish I had asked him to stop asking me personal questions. But I'm polite to a fault, even when I'm not working, so I kept smiling and laughing and giving friendly but impersonal answers. "You're very warm," he told me. "Have you ever worked with kids?" He talked about how a lot of the girls he dates, back wherever he was from, Ohio maybe, are shallow and materialistic, and how I seem like such a down-to-earth girl, and I was such a cutie. And I'm like the girl next door, but cool, he told me. I imagine he was referring to my tattoos again. At this point, I was physically queasy and uncomfortable, but couldn't disengage. Guest reviews are hugely important in the hospitality business, so at this hotel we're strictly trained to let guests treat you however they want. You just can't upset them. It would probably have been reasonable at this point to ask him to leave the front desk. But I felt helpless, and being assertive with people at work is so against my instinct that it didn't even cross my mind to say anything. Because of this, I had to stay there listening to this guy and politely accepting compliments. I assumed he typically got away with it, since he was attractive and clean-cut with a slight baby face. I kept praying for the phone to ring and for someone to ask me to perform some sort of complicated and long task so I could get away, but the only time it did was when a neighbouring hotel called to ask if we had printer ink. Mindy was on the phone in the back until eventually Sam, our night auditor, arrived, and I realised that this guy had monopolised the entire last 2 hours of my shift trying to get me to sleep with him, and/or admit I secretly supported Trump. No. Hoping Mr. Hanson would take this as his cue to leave, I went into the office and got my coat and backpack. When I came back out to witness Sam count the drawer, Mr. Hanson was still standing there. "Well, I hope you have a good night," I said to him. "Are you walking out this way?" He gestured down the hallway, which led to all of the rooms as well as the door to the back parking lot. I told him I had parked out front, which thankfully was true, and I was able to get to my car successfully. I sat there for a while responding to the texts that had piled up on my phone while Mr. Hanson was diverting my attention. It was about a 10-minute drive from the hotel to my apartment downtown, and I noticed that a car was pulling out of the parking lot at the same time that I was. It wasn't Mindy's car. She always stayed an extra half an hour after her shift technically ended, but there was another hotel next door, so I assumed it was an employee or guest there. I wasn't too concerned when the Nissan was right behind me, but I noticed it had Florida plates, which a lot of rental cars around here do. I take a weird way to get across town after work, which involves cutting through the university hospital's enormous, needlessly complex parking lot, which spans about 3 blocks. It wasn't necessarily a quicker route, but I liked how there were never any cars there this time of night, and I could go as fast as I wanted to. The parking lot, as I said, is needlessly complex, which means stoplights, which all turn into blinking yellows after 9 p.m, medians and grassy areas placed seemingly at random, and a lot of twists and turns which all go to very specific buildings and exits. I'm explaining this parking lot in so much detail to express how strange it was that this rental car was following me through this pretty nonsensical route. It's not a way that any kind of Maps app would take you, since there are more straightforward streets surrounding the parking lot. I initially assumed it was someone going to the hospital, since it was the only major medical facility in about a 100-mile radius, and the only well-funded one in an even larger area. A lot of people and their families stayed at the hotel who were there for the hospital, so the momentary explanation I gave myself seemed feasible. It was maintaining a polite distance, but it was one of those cars with the ultra-bright LED headlights, which were blinding in my mirrors, so the car was impossible to ignore. It followed me around each turn, and at one point, just to see, I went in a big circle around the south half of the lot, and sure enough the other car made the same circle. My explanation, which was already crumbling, dissolved completely when I drove past the entrances to both the main hospital and the emergency room. Steady consumption of crime shows, scary movies and true crime Reddit pages, podcasts, have made me a very paranoid person. Serial killers really seem to love college-aged women. So at that point I picked up that something was probably wrong. I figured I should avoid going back to my real apartment, especially since it's just begging to be broken into, with a lot of windows and a very old front door that opens directly to the outside. Obviously at this point I was relatively certain it was Mr. Hanson. Like I said, I'd had guests cross the line before, making me come out from behind the desk to hug them, touching me when I'm straightening up the lobby, asking the front desk to bring up a towel and answering the door in various states of undress, etc. But I had never been followed or particularly fixated on. A hotel receptionist, even if they're good looking, is someone you have a couple of brief and pleasant interactions with, but you don't really think about them when they're not there. I decided my best bet would be to get back to the hotel. I looped back through town, the Nissan following at a polite distance. I'll reiterate, he was trying to be as discreet as he could, keeping as far behind as he could while still keeping me in sight. He wasn't trying to intimidate me so much as, I'm not sure, monitor me? Whatever his reasons, I was still afraid. I abandoned the use of turn signals and sped back to the hotel, calling the hotel along the way and asking Sam if he, and possibly the security guard we contracted to patrol the property after 11 p.m, could meet me at the front door. When I arrived at the hotel, I pulled around to the front, where Sam and the security guard were standing under the awning, while the Nissan hit the gas to the back lot. I explained the situation and the security guard went out the back door to look for the car and its driver. When he came back, he said that he spoke to a preppy blonde guy outside who was coming inside. He had said he had just been out to smoke a cigarette and was now returning to his room. Security asked him if he'd seen a Nissan with Florida plates, and he said that he hadn't. There wasn't much more we could do at that point. Luckily, I wouldn't be working for a couple of days after Mr. Hansen was set to check out, and we were fully sold out that weekend, so he couldn't extend his stay if he wanted to. All guests are asked upon check-in to write down make, model, colour and plate of their vehicle on the registration card. So just to confirm, I pulled his reg card and sure enough, it was a silver Nissan Altima with Florida plates. Here's what he wrote on his TripAdvisor review, edited for privacy. Great stay, room was clean, breakfast was hot, and that's all I can ask for. The best thing about this hotel was the staff though. I had a lovely time with the two ladies at the front desk, one of them being an especially sweet girl. Hope to be seeing you sooner rather than later. Mr. Hansen, we won't ever meet again, because my manager put you on the banned list. This happened a month ago when I was working at a store called Box Lunch. It was on the upper level of the mall. I'm 16, a guy, and I'd been working there for maybe 5 to 6 months before this incident. I was working the late shift, which was from 6 till 9 p.m. that day. The store closes at 9, so that's when I would lock up and leave. I was working with one other person that night, let's call her May. She was my age, maybe older by a month, and she was a super fun person to hang out with and to work with. She was chilled and not really talkative, which was great because I'm not talkative either. We went to the same high school, so we sort of knew each other and got on along well. I would also pick her up sometimes to go to work if we were on the same shift together. Side note, totally not related to the story, but I think May liked me and I kinda hope so because I really liked her. We were both behind the counter talking and laughing. There was barely anyone in the mall because it was late, so that left me and May alone in the store for a while. As we're talking, this skinny man wearing a train conductor hat walks into the store. He was an older man, maybe in his 50s or older. He was wearing a dirty green jacket and badly ripped jeans. This dude looked like he was homeless, but I didn't want to assume anything. May greeted him with a smile, but he didn't pay attention to her. He just kept walking through the store. We kinda looked at each other with a sort of, what's up with this guy look. As he was walking through the store, I kept an eye on him to make sure he wouldn't try to steal anything. He didn't try to steal anything, but he kept talking to himself and glancing back at May and I, mainly May. I was getting weird vibes off this guy. After about 15 minutes, the guy walked up to the counter and placed a Terminator Funko Pop on the counter. I asked him the usual cashier questions, but he didn't answer any of them. He wasn't even looking at me. He kept glancing at May, who was messing around with the computer. I don't think she noticed. I told him his total and he pulled out a crumpled up $10 bill and handed it to me. He took the Funko Pop and left. No receipt, no change. He walked out and that was the end of that. May and I talked about the guy and what happened with some chills and some laughs, and before we knew it our shift was over and we began to lock up. We walked out to my car in the parking lot, and whilst we talked it just felt like any other regular day where I drive her home and see her the next time we were at work. But this wasn't the same. When we gotten pretty close to my car, May noticed there was something on my hood. I didn't see it at first because it was too small from where we were standing. We took a closer look and realised what it was. My heart sank. I think May's heart did too because of the look on her face. It was the Terminator figurine that the weird man had bought in the store. I picked it up and looked at it. May was freaking out and looking all around the parking lot trying to find the man. It didn't make any sense to me. How could this guy know which car was mine? I looked up and joined May in looking around the parking lot. Then I noticed the man standing under one of the street lamps in front of me. It was like something out of a movie, because once he'd seen me look at him, he began walking towards us slowly. I told May to get in the car and she didn't object. We got in the car and I left the parking lot as fast as my car could go. We were both really freaked out and were trying to figure out what had just happened and why on the drive to our house. Over the next week or so, we talked about it at school and at work. We never told anyone because they probably wouldn't have believed us. So creepy guy who left a Terminator figure on my car. Let's not meet again. I live in a very rural community, and back in junior high school I was on the volleyball team. Every year the school would do a little fundraiser for all the sports team at this local tiny park. It had a couple of makeshift booths, a kitchen area and a stage. Each team would come up with a game and the players would take turns running that booth. In those days I was attached at the hip to one friend in particular, who I'm still very close with. I'll name her Chris. We both played sports and attended the fundraiser event together. Her mum dropped us off at the park and was to pick us up after it was all over, so we could help with the cleanup. Both of our working shifts were early, so we had a lot of downtime. We danced the night away, and right before the event was over, we decided to play football with some of our friends. This park is basically a bunch of fields with trees separating the different field segments. There is a parking lot when you first enter, and it was there where everyone was parking that night. Directly in front of the parking lot is the location for all the booths. This whole setup is on top of a big hill, and at the bottom of the hill is where we played football, as there was just enough light from the booth area to see. Now, on with the story. I was picked as a sitter for the first game. I get bored easily and noticed my dad's first cousin was walking around the parking lot. He is on the rescue squad and was basically patrolling it. Now this man isn't someone I have often seen in my life, but enough that I know who he is and he knows who I am. Right before it all started, my parents were going through a divorce. This man and his wife had picked up some furniture with my mum for her new home. They were literally with us the entire day for about 2 weeks before this event. The following conversation just gets creepier the older I get. I walked up to my dad's cousin and said, "Hey, how are you?" He responds with, "Hey girl," which is a very usual response for him, and he wraps his arms around my shoulders. Again, very normal behaviour for him, so no red flags. We make small talk and he asks polite questions about my family that I in return politely answer. The whole time we were talking, he asks normal adult questions, and I bring up the furniture he moved in my house. This is where things got weird. This whole time he is walking me around these cars with his arm around my shoulders. It's a decent-sized parking lot, and after a while I realise that we're heading to the far corner, which is about 2 car lengths, until we reach darkness and a grove of woods that circles down around this park. I stop, but he keeps gently guiding me towards this grove of trees. It's weird and I'm starting to sense some red flags. His grip has also tightened up a bit, but at the time I was just confused about what was happening. I put my arm across his lower back and sort of spin us around so we get a few feet back and go back towards the centre of the lot. I've surprised him a little, but when we regain our footing he just stops moving and stands there with his arms still around me. At this point I keep saying my friends are waiting and I need to go, and yet he just keeps talking. I'm no longer letting him guide me around, and just when I'm about to kick him in the sunshine place, I hear Chris. She yells very loudly and comes running into the lot. She also makes a big show of getting her basketball coach's attention, saying we would be right over to do something. Finally the death grip loosens and I walk away. My mind was reeling and I was so confused, but I wanted this guy to realise I was onto him. I turned once I was a safe distance and said that I would tell my dad he said hello. This goofy clown of a man straight up says, "Who is your father?" I'm completely flabbergasted, but tell him my dad's name. Even though it was under bad lighting, I swear the colour had drained from his face. I just said, "Oh," and walked away. To this day I have no idea who this man thought I was, or why he was guiding me to the dark. We talked about both my parents and their divorce during our stroll around, so it beats me. I did tell my mum about the situation and she just said he's a goofball and to stay away from him. I know this isn't the creepiest let's not meet story, but I just hope some younger people can learn something from this. I was too terrified of making a scene, and really think looking back on it I was in a lot of danger. My friend Chris later told me that she had watched part of what happened and got creeped out because she realised where he was leading me and that I was very clearly trying to walk away. That's why she ran over screaming and got adult attention. It's so weird because as a young person you're so afraid of causing a scene over nothing, but your safety is more important than that. If a situation ever makes you uncomfortable, do everything you can to get out. So creepy relative guy, let's not meet again, ever.